So, welcome to our inaugural City Club of Chicago. We are going to be launching a podcast, and as I think you're aware, the City Club is Chicago's premier civic engagement forum and public affairs forum. It's 120 years old, but really in the last couple of years, we've reinvented it to engage the next generation. And what we've been doing lately is talking to all sorts of leaders from around, started in Chicago, and then we realized that we have this global reach, and we've been able to attract incredible people like you, and so many of them that we've identified as really future leaders. And you've been there, you've got so much great track record, but we know you're going to be around for a long time, and we look forward to having you back.
Thanks for having me.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome officially Mayor Mitch Landrieu to the City Club of Chicago. And I do encourage anyone, if you have a question, you're welcome to chime in here. I'm going to start off, and we're just going to have a few-minute conversation for our initial broadcast of Be in the Room. You are in the room here at City Club. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, Mayor Landrieu. Let's get us started. We are big fans, of course, of Chicago. And, of course, we hope that you're a big fan of Chicago.
Chicago.
This isn't your first time.
No. I love Chicago.
Tell us about...
When I ran for mayor in a not successful mayoral race, Chris Matthews for some reason, felt the need to come to New Orleans to host a debate. And he said, well, who if you get elected, who are you going to, lean on to figure out what you're doing? And I said, well, Richie Daley would be the first person that I would call. Mike Bloomberg, I think, was around. He was the second. And I did that because my father, who was mayor, like the previous Mayor Daley's dad, said to me, the first thing a smart person does is know what they don't know and find somebody who really does and ask them for help. And really, when I got elected, Richie Daley was one of the first people that I called because I had come to really admire the way that Chicago had kind of turned itself around. Everybody keeps asking about, well, what's going to happen with San Francisco and Detroit and Chicago and New York? And I have to remind them, in 1976, the city of New York was on the verge of bankruptcy. It was going down. And my dad, who was then the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, with a bunch of other mayors, had to go to Congress and really push on people really hard on behalf of John Lindsay and Abe Beame to basically say, listen, cities in so many ways are the backbone of America. Without cities, the rural areas are going to have trouble. They're partners, actually. And if cities fall, the rural areas of the country are going to fall. And so you can't let that happen. And essentially learned very early on that most of the big cities in America had really strong bones. And, of course, Chicago is one of the great cities of all time. And Richie came in, and because he was just really practical and hard-nosed and smart, I think he and a lot of the people in this room helped turn the city around. And surely enough, after he got out of office, I said, can I come see you again? So this was some years later, and I met him, I don't know, down the street at a coffee shop. He was standing outside on the corner, if I remember, with a white shirt on, with no coat, no tie, and I don't know, he looked like a Jesuit priest kind of, But I'm sure, whatever. But in any event, we were standing on this street, and I said, Richie, the street was beautiful. It was beautiful. It had a beautiful canopy of trees on it, and it had street lights that were under the trees. And I said, Richie, how did you make this street so beautiful? Because I'd admired your bridges. And I always remembered about Chicago that when, and I told him this, I said, you must have made sure that the design of this city made people really feel good because you painted your bridges, the architectural designs people paid attention to. You can notice this when you come into town. I said, but tell me about this street. And he goes, actually, it's an interesting thing that you asked me. Only mayors would have this conversation, by the way. We're sitting there, and I said, so what the hell? And he said, well, the neighbors were yelling and screaming because the lights were on top of the trees, and they wanted to come in and cut the trees, but nobody wanted to cut the trees, and they were yelling and screaming at each other. And I said, well, I don't know what happened. He goes, well, this is what happened. I came and I listened to him, and I said to somebody, what if we just reduce the height of the light pole and put it under the trees, and then we can have both? And I remember that forever because it is so emblematic of being a problem solver and finding people who are intractable, who don't think outside of the box. Other mayors would have just cut the trees down. Richie Daley was like my grandpa. He's like, don't ever cut a tree down because they're really beautiful. Now, these mayors also, as you know, can have to become, folks that work, especially the mayor of Chicago, the mayor of New York, and other places in international affairs. But mayors never get away from the very, very, very basic thing about what it feels like on a street corner, outside of a business or outside of a house, because those are the people that you see on the street every day. And because you're a mayor, they can literally get to you. They can get to you in a way that they can't get to a governor, or they can't get to a president, because you're right there. You're at the grocery store, you're wherever you are. And so it kind of engenders in people who want to be mayors this kind of intimacy that reminds you every day that you're responsible for everything. And I remember that day and many other things that he told me, and emulated, a lot of the work that I did. And that's why, the best job I've ever had was being mayor of New Orleans. Don't tell President Biden that, but but it is. And anybody that's been a mayor will tell you that. It's a wonderful thing. If you got a city like Chicago, which is a real thoroughbred, it's got to be a kick in the pants to run the city.
Yeah, absolutely. You've so mayor, we've mayors around the world, right? And you said it. I think there could be so much more of that.
Well, I'll tell you that. You say that. Mike Bloomberg, who was the second person I went, so he told me. I said, Mike, what am I supposed to do? I've been wanting to do this for a while. He said, I got just three pieces of advice for you. One, hire a great scheduler, because your time is the most important thing that you have. Everybody's going to want it, and it's really going to be critically important that you guard it jealously and use it well, because you only have a certain amount of days. Well, that stuck in my mind, so I was like, how many days do I have? And then you go write them down and you count them. And in my administration, my deputy mayor sitting right there, Ryan Burney, we had on the wall, this is day 8, this is day 1300, this is day whatever. And we actually could remember the best days and the worst days of our administration. So he said, hire a good scheduler. And then he said, do all the hard stuff first. Whatever's the hardest that you have to get done, get it done, because your political capital will evaporate. If you're lucky, it'll grow. But sometimes people don't spend their political capital, and then you're just wasting your time. So that's the second thing. And the third thing he said was, and he said, keep this in mind, Mitch. He said, mayors can do anything except sign treaties and declare war. And I said, well, I never thought about that before. He said, everybody gets elected mayor, and you think, well, I can't do this because I'm not the governor. I can't do this because I'm not the president. He said, the only two things you cannot do constitutionally are those two things. So view yourself in an expansive role. You can become an ambassador for the United States through the mayor's office to mayors around the world. And so even though you can't sign a treaty, you can actually confect agreements between mayors, because mayors in Paris do the same thing that mayors in Chicago and mayors in New Orleans do, like find a way to collect money from citizens for water bills. There's actually a better way to do that in other places, and the best and the most efficient practices aren't just restricted to the United States. So that expanded my sense of where you could go find, answers. If you go to Paris right now and you think you've got a small area like the French Quarter in New Orleans that has normal streets, and you're thinking about, well, the trucks are busting up the ground. Well, they actually have trucks there that are smaller of scale and are less weighty. And for people in the municipal world, when people are thinking about, well, I don't have water because my pipes are busted, then you have to think about those very, very, very minute details in people's lives. And the best answers to those things you find in cities around the world. So if you think about that for a minute and don't think, well, I'm just a mayor of Chicago and I have to stay focused, here to find all the answers in the world. When they're out there, it opens up a whole bunch of possibilities that you never thought about before.
That reminds me of a number of years ago when you were here and I was here working for Mayor Daley, and he was inviting mayors from around the world, and no one really understood why, right? We had the U.S. Arab cities, we had the Hemisphere Forum, and then eventually we just had the Global Cities Forum. It was like he slowly just took over. But what I always remember about that, it was like the United Nations. If you remember, we had, I think there were 12 booths in the back, sound booths with translators in 12 different languages. Everybody was speaking the same language.
Correct. And I'll tell you,
spoke different languages. It was the same issues, the same problems, the same solutions. And they shared it, and it was amazing. I think the world kind of stepped a bit forward those 2 days.
Difficult. You pass it over to Ram. I was here when Ram was hosting that event, and I'm sure, and hopefully Mayor Johnson, will do the same thing. The world comes to Chicago is an international city. I mean, this place is known throughout the world, and there's no reason not to attract the best and the brightest from around the world here and use, what it is that you have about this reputation to continue for this city to continue to grow, and it's just going to get better over time. Chicago, like every other city, has tremendously difficult challenges. We have income inequality. We have too many kids that are shooting and getting shot. on Arnie Duncan is doing incredible work down on the south side with CRED. I did a lot of that work when I was in New Orleans, but I borrowed a lot from the work that they did, and we tried to share it as well. Trying to grow entrepreneurship in the minority community is critically important, making sure that to the extent that you can, the governor and the mayors, to the extent that they can, and personalities always get in the way, and politics always get in the way, and it's not necessarily party, but trying to find alignment with the state house is important, especially if you live in a blue city that's in a red state, which like New Orleans is. You don't really have that same challenge, but what I found when I was mayor of New Orleans and we were rebuilding the city after Katrina was that the federal government was really critical to our success. But what was as critical was the relationship between the president, the cabinet secretaries, with the governor and his cabinet secretaries, and as importantly, the mayor and his cabinet, because you have to have vertical and horizontal integration. In other words, everybody's got to be on the same page. So even if you get past what they talk about in Washington, should we pass a bill or should we not pass a bill? They kind of get to, we don't want to pass a bill most of the time. But when they do and they finally have something, that money or that idea has got to get down to the ground. And it's got to get down to the ground. It should, in a system that works, in a way that has fealty and that is reflective of what Congress really intended. So sometimes, somebody will design a horse, and by the time it gets down to the ground, it'll be a pig. You want to try to avoid.
Only in New Orleans.
Well, we always talk about food and drink, but that's when I became the president asked me to come up and do the infrastructure implementation. We thought of how we help rebuild New Orleans, and essentially, and Ryan Burney, was my deputy mayor, came up and was my senior advisor in the implementation. We asked every governor to create an implementation coordinator, and the idea was to make sure that on the federal level, I helped coordinate all the cabinet secretaries so that a mayor or governor didn't have to go talk to 14 people. But that when that money started getting pushed down to the ground, whether it was through the Department of Transportation or the Department of Energy or Interior, whatever it was, that when it came down to the state, all the state secretaries were coordinated because a lot of this money was cross-agency. And then we made sure that mayors had infrastructure coordinators, and we let those infrastructure coordinators kind of be the quarterback, which is why in a very short period of time, we pushed, I think about $600 billion out the door, incentivized $1 trillion in private sector investment. We have 60,000 projects going on in America right now, rebuilding the roads and the bridges, airports, ports, waterways. Y'all have gotten a bucket load of it. High-speed internet, clean air, safe water.
Can you help us get a little more?
Right. Everybody, I have.
It's actually why we invited you
Chicago,
here.
Chicago and Illinois should be very proud of the senators, the congressional delegation, and of course the governor, who is always like, what do we got going on? What do we need? How do we organize ourselves? It's a competition, no question, and we try to keep it that way. But there is such an incredible need in the country to create a foundation, of a structural foundation on which private business can grow. And that is a real thing. I'm talking about real concrete. And so President Biden was completely right about this idea. If you invest in people, child tax credit, workforce training, give them the tools that they need, especially women who want to get in the workforce, daycare, and then you invest in things, you actually build things. The private sector will then come in on top of that. And this is not really hard to understand, and it's eminently provable. In New Orleans, if you come downtown, there's a streetcar that everybody in the world knows, but we put a new streetcar track downtown New Orleans, about 3 blocks from City Hall, all the way into the French Quarter and the Marigny. We got a $70 million, what used to be called the Tiger Grant. When we did that, or because we were doing that, the Hyatt Regency, which the whole Pritzker family, decided to take the hotel that's downtown in a prominent space and literally turn the entrance of the hotel around. It used to face the Superdome, but because we were doing this infrastructure thing and they knew people were going to be out there, they literally went and reorganized the whole hotel, turned it inside out, and then as a consequence of laying that rail line and having that streetcar line, $2 billion of private sector investment, small businesses, restaurants, musical halls, all peeled off of that. Now, when you add that up and multiply it by 60,000 and maybe 120,000, that's why the private sector is starting to say, you know what, I can make money off of that. So when other people tell you, investment infrastructure doesn't make any sense, it's a pro-growth strategy. And Joe Biden's really the first person who said, I'm going to put my muscle behind putting real money on the ground. And Vice President Harris was the one that helped lead the effort on broadband, making sure that kids were drinking water without lead in it, and all kinds of other stuff, it really works. And when government shows up at the right time and they create right partnerships, everybody in the country benefits tremendously.
I love hearing that, because so much of what we do at City Club is bring together the public sector, elected officials, cabinet members, everyone that you mentioned, along with the private sector, the philanthropic sector, the nonprofit sector. That's this room right here on a smaller version. And of course, we're just getting started with so much more to come. And we're going to take, okay, we got a couple of extra folks coming in. We're going to take a pause for a second. As I said, we're very casual here at City Club. Cam Buckner is joining us, and thanks to Cam helped us. Cam helped us arrange all of this today.
I want you, before Cam sits down, I want you to know that he signed a confidentiality agreement before he left working with me.
So let's real quick, Cam, you're on number 2, I think. Give that a
testing.
There we go. So, Cam, I've been asking Mayor a few questions. We talked about being mayor. We talked about as he's gotten into a shift into the White House, how mayors have and should rule the world, some practical solutions, and like I mentioned, we appreciate you being here. So we're gonna add Cam Buckner to the conversation. Cam's a state representative here in the state of Illinois, a great public servant, and as I talked about, elevating the next generation, existing leaders who are going to be doing so much more. We see Cam as one of those great leaders in Chicago. So adding Cam Buckner to this conversation, thank you, Cam, for being here with us at City Club. And chime in anywhere you'd like. We're getting a little bit of background from Mayor Landrieu. We're talking a little bit about, we haven't gotten into the future quite yet, but Cam knows the mayor very well. You worked with him right for a number of years. If you would give us a couple minutes about your background with Mayor Landrieu.
Yeah, so, and I apologize for my tardiness, everybody else.
It's a busy week.
But so I was finishing up law school here in Chicago at DePaul, and I had spent the previous 6 years in the U.S. Senate working for Senator Durbin, and was really trying to figure out what my next move was. Because I have so many friends and family in the city of New Orleans, I paid tangential attention to what went on there politically. And the night that Mitch got elected, I watched his acceptance speech, or his victory speech. And I said, I wonder if they're looking for some help down there. And oddly enough, began to have some conversations. They had a communications role that popped up on the internet. And so I just went for it. And I made my way down to New Orleans. I took the Amtrak down. This is how broke I was. Took the Amtrak down for my interview, and really fell in love with what they were doing there. I think one thing that is worth highlighting is that when Mitch got elected in 2010, there was a national conversation going on about New Orleans, but not with New Orleans. People in New York and Chicago and Washington were having conversations about whether or not New Orleans should even exist, whether or not it was worth rebuilding, right? And the fact that he took the bull by the horns and really wanted to not just show folks that New Orleans was open for business, but that New Orleans was this great American metropolis that needed to be resourced. That was a big deal. And what the mayor used to always say is that, to the folks in Chicago and LA and Houston, we appreciate you, and we appreciate your help, but we don't want to be more like you. We want to be more like ourselves, right? And so that thread that ran through, remember that? The thread that ran through.
I'm just happy that you did.
I did, and it meant a lot. It meant a lot because it really showed, I think, the trajectory and contextualized where the city was going under his leadership. It was a great time to be there.
What did you see in Cam?
Well, in New Orleans, y'all may say this here in the neighborhood, but we always like people that are real. We have a saying, you may say it here, but can you feel me? That's a common phrase in New Orleans. And if you connect with somebody like that, and you invest in people, then it makes a lot of sense. I mean, many of you have hired a lot of folks, and a lot of people have great resumes. And, when you get to a certain level, everybody's resume kind of looks the same, and they're all fantastic. But it's about a certain feel, a certain get up and go, a willingness to sacrifice. Cam had all of those things. You could tell, the day he stepped in that he was going to do really great things. I'm glad y'all have him. I'm kind of bummed out he didn't stay in New Orleans.
Yeah, thanks for letting him come this way.
He might be the mayor of New Orleans right now if he would have stayed there, Well,
we're fortunate. We're fortunate to have him, and again, we're fortunate to have you here, Mayor Landrieu. Thanks, Cam. And Mayor, let's back up a minute. You got into the White House. You got into infrastructure. Could you talk for a minute about that shift from your world as being a mayor? And I know it wasn't an immediate step into the White House, but there's a big difference between national, federal government and the White House and in cities. You talk a lot about practical solutions on the streets, and they're probably historically not implemented that easily on the federal level. How did that go for you?
Right,
moving into the White House.
They're very different jobs. If you're a mayor of a major American city and you're in a strong mayor form of government, which is to say, you initiate the budget, you have the veto pen, you got the big microphone, you have the appointments of a whole lot of non-civil service folks that are basically depend on you for their jobs. You kind of got an army, and you're the boss. And if you walk out the next day and tell your traffic engineer to take that street and make it another one way the other way, it just happens, and it happens fast. When you work on the federal level, unless you're the president, you don't have that kind of stroke. Mostly when you work in the White House, you're in an advisory position, and you're a part of a much, much larger organization that, on a day, it's impossible for me to explain to you how complicated the presidency is. That's why when people were saying President Biden didn't have what it took to be that's just insanely wrong. When you watch the day of a president, I mean, the things that you can know about, because you can't know about half of it because it's national security. I mean, just early, to rise and late to bed and complicated and meeting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, sometimes in 3 or 4 different locations during the day. So it is a mammoth organization, no matter who's in charge of it. But when you go up there on something that I was asked to do, I'm not aware of this ever being done before. I think the idea of some of it came out of the work that we did in New Orleans when then President Obama and Vice President Biden, who, by the way, was helping us back then. So Joe Biden's not new to Louisiana, or to this idea. We really kind of worked hard in New Orleans to try to figure out how to get the federal government united. And so this idea of one team, one fight, horizontal and vertical integration, in my mind, came from us trying to do that work. So when President Biden got elected, I was at the time running a not-for-profit, which I still have. It's called E Pluribus Unum, that works on the issues of race and class across America, because they continue to be a very critical and important issue for us, which we haven't obviously resolved yet. And they called me up there to do this. I really wasn't paying much attention, honestly, to what Congress was doing. And I knew that they were thinking about an infrastructure bill, but I certainly wasn't paying attention to the idea that they would then want to spend time on the execution of it. So I was thrilled, because it's critically important, and it generally doesn't happen unless you make it. And so unless you have the power of the presidency behind you, and you're in a position where your power, which is derivative from him, is real, you don't really have the power to do anything. But he actually put authority in the office. And so I kind of served as the liaison with, we hosted 21 cabinet meetings on behalf of the president and the vice president. All the cabinet secretaries came, and it was a joy. Each and every one of them was better than the next. They were all good. They all wanted to be there. We had a couple of ex-mayors. Tom Vilsack is the Secretary of Agriculture. Pete Buttigieg is an ex-mayor. Marshall Fudge was an ex-mayor. Jenny Granholm was a governor. Gina Raimondo was a governor. So we had some real thoroughbreds that knew.
Kind of unique, right? To have that many mayors, and
I found it. Well, that's unique. But what was more unique is how helpful each of them were to each other, and how much each of them understood that they didn't want to protect that turf. That wasn't going to help the president. What they wanted to do was make sure that they delivered to their folks that work for them the need to cut across agency lines because, in politics, people get a little tight. There's some sharp elbows. The president's directive to me and his directive to the cabinet secretaries was work together. We're better together. That thing that he says, and everybody thinks that's a cute little thing. He actually really means it. And he means it because it works. And he gave me the authority to be the convener and helping everybody just figure out that. But then, because of my work in New Orleans, I knew that as a mayor, I couldn't get anything done if the governor and I weren't working together. And of course, the way Congress wrote this bill, which you have to remind them of sometimes, because when they say, can you get me can you fund a project in my district? And I say, go ask the governor. They say, why? I said, because you told me I had to. Because that's what the bill says. But so you have to work around what actually the bill was. And the infrastructure bill, it's $1.2 trillion. I don't know, it's got something like 280 programs. You throw the Inflation Reduction Act on top of that, it's about a $1.6 trillion spend. Half of that money goes directly to the governors in pipelines that had been previously set up, like highway funds, et cetera, et cetera. But the other half is for competitive grants. So the governors then got to be a really powerful entity. And of course, if they weren't coordinating with the cabinet secretaries and they weren't then coordinating with their mayors, then all of a sudden it gets stuck. And we're in the process right now as we speak. We're only 2.5, 3 years into what I think is a 5 to 7 to 9 year thing. That structure, which I call the mousetrap, it's really important that gets right. As I like to say many times, if you can kind of coordinate and you get the way right, you can do a lot of things. If you don't get the way right, you can't do that many things. You can do some, and 1 or 2 of them will be spectacular. But if you want to build on a big scale, essentially the baseball team or the players of the football team, they got to be on the same page. Which player will win? Where's everybody going? What are we doing? What is your role? What's it supposed to look like when we finish? We get a touchdown. That's what it looks like. You have to actually manage that. And then government, I think I don't know, maybe I'll agree with this, kind of like your closet in your house. It just keeps accumulating stuff. And if you don't clean it out, it gets to be unusable after time. And so you have to every day make sure that while you're building it, you're actually keeping it tight and lean. It's not about being big or small. It's about working well or not. You know what I mean? And being right-sized for whatever the need is.
So you're talking team members, you're getting money to governors, you're talking about football and football players. Cam, are you seeing where the rubber meets the road here? Is these trillions that are coming down into the states from a state legislator's perspective? How are you seeing that, and how is that process going from the other end of it, where we actually have to implement a lot of these funds that Mayor Landrieu is talking about?
For sure. What I'll say is that specifically in the state of Illinois, we are in the most prosperous time ever when it comes to infrastructure and that type of work, right? So we passed a huge $56 billion infrastructure bill at the state capitol, aligned with what the Biden administration did in Washington, D.C., aligned with the fact that we tagged the motor fuel tax for inflation and put specific dollars that will go specifically for public transportation and roads and bridges. And so it's a perfect storm. It's all happening at once. But as Mayor Landrieu said, often when we're siloed, the lack of connective tissue doesn't let these programs be as effective as they can be, right? And so the words that we used to use in the Landrieu administration were facilitate link and leverage, right? If you can find a way, I still got it, Mitch. I still remember. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. And so yeah, it's very
explain that.
Pivotal.
Explain that. The Lincoln reference.
Well, the idea, facilitate link and leverage.
Yeah.
Downline logistics. If you can't find a way, make one. That's kind of how we ran. But facilitate link and leverage meant if you're a mayor and let's say you don't have direct power to do something, you kind of need friends. So use the power of your mayor's office to be a convener, facilitate gatherings, facilitate meetings. You see people all the time. You say, oh my gosh, you two folks could get together. If you did that and you add what you're doing to what I'm doing, we can do better. So you facilitate, you link them together, and then you teach people how to leverage their respective assets so that the sum of it is a whole lot better than each of its individual parts. It's just a way of being, actually, and it works all the time, whether you're in private business or you're not. I have found people who are selfish, people who think about themselves, people who think about them getting ahead and leaving others behind, think about yesterday rather than tomorrow, think about, well, if that person does well, I'm not going to do well. They kind of tend to be in organizations that atrophy over time. They just don't work. And this is absolutely true in the business sector as much as it is in the public sector. And Joe Biden proved that to America when he passed this bill, and through the implementation, we pushed out $600 billion. The private sector is now $1 trillion in. $1 trillion. And so now, like in Illinois, Governor Pritzker says, well, hell, if that's where the play is, I'm going to put some skin in the game too. So you lay $56 billion on top of that here, all of a sudden, more things are getting built. Better things are getting done. The water system's getting improved. Internet, where it wasn't before, that because folks need or are moving in the right direction. And then one thing starts to feed the other. Some governors said, nah, you know what? I don't like that Biden guy. I don't want any of that money. And, after he gave us the American Rescue Plan money, I'm not saying some governors didn't manage their budgets well, but we actually put money in people's budgets. So when they said we were governing well, we have these great surpluses, it's because the federal government, Joe Biden particularly, said after COVID, I don't want teachers unemployed. I don't want firefighters unemployed. I don't want policemen unemployed. I don't want the states to have to go make a terrible decision because COVID killed so much of it. He said, I think the federal government's got a role. And as a consequence, it gave states a lot of room to actually start planning long-term. Now, some governors, because they wanted to make political, points, said, oh, I'm just going to create this big tax break, for wealthy people. And and instead of adding that money that you had and that you needed, to infrastructure projects to produce growth that lasts a long time, they started going in the other direction. I think, and we'll be able to demonstrate this because I can tell you where every project is in America and what the state of it is right now, because data is important and being able to see things is important. You're going to find out that some states that run to the fire, and worked with us are doing better than others. Georgia is a really good example. Although the governor of Georgia that keeps trying to take credit for all the manufacturing facilities that are opening up there because of the Inflation Reduction Act, he nevertheless, as a rural governor, is not running away from electric vehicles. And as a consequence right now, I know that we're in a campaign, but Donald Trump said that he was going to open up manufacturing in America. He closed innumerable plants, didn't open one. Joe Biden and team, I think we've opened 25 of them right now, and you can physically go see where they are. And there is a thing called the electric vehicle corridor that goes all the way from kind of areas in the South Georgia all the way up through the country that are actually being manufactured right now. And the reason that's important is because you actually have people working in them that did not work in them before. I'll give you the best recent example. I was in Arizona, and we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, we passed the Infrastructure Act, we passed the CHIPS Act. CHIPS Act is real simple. They're making all the chips in Taiwan, right? Taiwan is in a precarious situation that we necessarily can or cannot control. Nobody knows what's happening. But the president wanted to maintain control and started building stuff back here. So that's why these manufacturing plants have gone up. But particularly, we have money that we're working with the private sector with to start manufacturing chips in America so we can protect our national security and keep our economic, primacy where it needs to be. A lot of that money, because of the way the private sector moved, went to Phoenix and all over the country. It went also to New York as well. But right now in Phoenix, they're building, I think, 3 what they call fabs, which are manufacturing facilities for these chips. Before they finish, they're going to be 30,000 jobs, a good portion of which are going to pay more than $100,000, all right? They're being built as we speak. I was there, I don't know, a month, 2 months ago, and I think Local 176, forgive me if I've gotten the number wrong, and there were 3 young women of color standing there. One of them was 18, one of them was 22, one of them was 28. They were from the Navajo Nation. They had all been taught how to weld through the apprenticeship program. All of them were physically, at that time, working to build the site that Intel is going to have to manufacture the chip. And every one of them said, this has changed my life, that they're buying houses now. They're making a living wage. They have daycare. They have now been trained. They have now diversified the entire workforce. And just in that nutshell, you can see the idea that President Biden and Vice President Harris had about not just building stuff, but actually using that money to build generational wealth for people that had been left out before, which is why they say we want to build something from the ground up and the middle out. And that they didn't just leave it to the richest guys in the country with a tax break to figure out whether if we gave them a little bit of money that they would somehow find these 3 women. They would have never found them, and their lives would have never been changed. And that's why the Biden-Harris idea of investing in people actually works, and you can prove it, every day.
So you're having no fun in this. Seeing the fruits of your labor, I can tell.
Well, I don't like to say I told you so all the time, but
well, I know you mentioned. I mean, I know you're not selfish. I've watched you lead. You're a leader. You are a civil servant. You are, Mayor Daley always says we're not there to serve the public, the party. We're there to serve the public, a public servant. What's next for you? You're a young man. You've had some incredible success.
Yeah, well,
we're here in a presidential election. I've heard your name, and it's in that same sentence of presidential elections. What's next for you? I've seen your, I've seen your history. I've seen your father, your grandfather. You've got an incredible history and an incredible track record. I can't imagine you're.
Well, it could be. I don't know, but I'll answer your question in a second. But I want to go back to the premise of your question, which is public service. People speak about that and they go, oh, well, that person's a good person because they enjoy serving other people. Some of us do. I like doing things that help other people. It makes me feel good. But my governing theory of reaching out and helping other people is not one because it makes you feel good or including other people because it makes you feel good. It's better for you. So like on the issue of race that I talked about before, you have this tremendous fear in the country unnecessarily that, oh my God, if we have too many brown people or if we have too many black people or this person's going to take my job or if women come into the workforce. I don't know why J.D. Vance keeps talking, but I just don't know why. But I'll tell you this story because my father, I got this from my daddy. When my daddy walked into a Loyola Law School, I think in 1954, one of the first people he met was a guy named Norman Francis, young African-American kid from South Louisiana. And they became that day best friends. Now, Norman was the first black that went to Loyola. And my father had no reason to be racially open. He grew up on a street called Adams Street, across the street from a cemetery. His mama worked in the front room of their house that was really only 18 feet wide, about 60 feet deep. She had a little store. He had one brother. They had no money. My grandpa worked for the public service. He went and turned the lights on and off. He had like a 5th grade education. And but when my father got to college and he saw this black kid, this is 1954 in the Deep South. This is before Brown versus Board of Education. He befriended Norman Francis, and their friendship impacted the rest of their lives and the future of New Orleans because Norman grew up, you see, to become the president of Xavier University, and he was the reigning longest-serving president of an HBCU in America and is revered by every president. And my father's other best friend was Pascal Calligero, a little Italian kid that couldn't get a job at any of the big firms because they only hired, white kids that went to certain schools. And he was Italian, and my dad was from the other side of the track. They had a little law practice together. Pascal Calligero went on to become the Chief Justice of Louisiana Supreme Court. So Moon Landrieu, who grew up as 29 years old, was only one of 2 people to vote against the governor's segregation package in 1960. And at that time, my mother, who was carrying me, had 4 children at home. The night that my father cast that vote, he got threatened by Leander Perez and Willie Rainick, who were 2 of the great racists in the history of America, and he basically had his life threatened. So that's the environment that I grew up in. And I remember my dad and I talking a lot about all of this stuff. And I said, Dad, why? I get that you did all that. And it was great, and people will give you a lot of adulation. He goes, yeah, I know. He goes, I don't really deserve it. And I said, well, why? Why did you do it? Why did you protect Norman? Why did you fight for him so hard? And he said really simply to me, he said, I wasn't fighting for Norman. He said, I was fighting for myself. He said, Norman made me better. Norman made all of us better. He was better. And as a consequence, he enriched my life and he created opportunity for me. And I never forgot that because there are too many people that get this completely wrong. They think that the more diverse we are, the weaker they are. They think the more diverse we are, the less they're going to have. They think the more diverse we are, the less that we're going to do. And that is categorically just wrong. It's morally wrong. It's civically wrong. But it's provably and demonstrably economically wrong that every place in the world that is open and that allows other people to come in, and this is not hard to understand. This is why I don't get why people don't get this. I was when I was between mayor and the White House. The not-for-profit that I have is called E Pluribus Unum. Out of many, we are one. We're traveling across the South. I don't know. We went to 32 counties. We talked to tons of people. I remember being at a high school in the hollows of Kentucky, and a young girl was sitting next to me. I think she was a junior, and bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. You could tell she was going to, change the world. She said to me, "Mr. Mayor, out here, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not." And that's the hardest thing about our life. And if you think about that, and the truer words have never, ever been spoken, and you know that this is true. If you go into the lower ninth ward of New Orleans, which people know is the place that got really hurt the most, right now, today, right now, you could go there, and if you stay there long enough, you can find a kid that could be the president of the United States, or a great artist, or a great musician, but you'll never see him. Jesmyn Ward told me this, who, if you haven't read any of her work, she's a beautiful, like a great writer. She lives in Mississippi. And I asked Jesmyn, I said, Jesmyn, how many, because she went on to have, she's celebrated Arthur. I said, how many other young women in Kill, Mississippi are there like you? Now, a not thoughtful person will say, well, only one, me, because I'm the greatest of all time, right? Only a thoughtless person says that. She was being honest. She said, actually, Mitch, there are a lot more. So think about what gets left behind when we try not to include everybody. It's and you ask yourself, who actually loses? We lose, because if one person can change the world, and you know that they can, think about what the absence of a person who's supposed to be there does, and how many of them there are, and how much we leave behind by not really working hard to reach down and to lift anybody up. And so the idea somehow that public service, it is a gift in some ways, but those of us that do it, we get more out of it. But it's because we reach out to people because they make us better. And I think if you keep that in mind, and you get into an argument with one of your friends or family at Thanksgiving dinner, which is just really getting tired, which is why Donald Trump has to really go away. I'm like, can I just ask this? Isn't everybody tired of going home to Thanksgiving dinner and getting fight with members of your family? I mean, really, like, we didn't have to used to do that, but now it's like I'm tired of it. But I think that thing you have to keep in mind. As it relates to me, look, I've been doing this 32 years. I was thinking about this the other day. Between me and my dad and my sisters and my brother, we've committed up to 132 years of public service.
132
years. Wow. And it's been an amazing gift, and who knows what happens after this stuff. I've been blessed to work in the White House. It was a joy. I love President Biden with all my heart. He will go down as being one of the most consequential presidents. And as a matter of fact, I was thinking about it this morning, Ryan. The president actually served 2 terms. He actually just did it in 3.5 years. That's what I think.
You heard it here at City Club, folks.
He did. He did more in 3.5 years than most presidents do in 2 terms. And history will record that. And they will also record his decision to step down as one of the most selfless acts that, and everybody in this room, I'm looking at you work with politicians. There are not too many politicians, as you know, that would do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Only a great guy can do that.
Very honorable man who we look forward to hearing from tonight.
Oh, it's going to be beautiful.
Yeah. So we have had a great discussion. We could do this all day. I know there's a lunch coming up that you're actually being recognized and honored at, so we don't want to keep you from that. It's a lunch that the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who is our partner here this week at City Club, is hosting to highlight all of the mayors who have been part of President Biden and the Biden-Harris administration. So we're going to wrap up here and let you get over there.
Awesome.
But we very much appreciate your time here at City Club of Chicago. We've got our partner WVON Radio is going to be broadcasting part of this to their radio shows. So much of the city of Chicago is going to be able to hear some of this conversation. And of course, City Club, as we launch our podcast called Be in the Room, We are honored to have you as one of the first and featured guests. We have so much great content to share with young people about public service, share with mayors about what it means to be a mayor and have an actual effect and change things on a daily basis in your cities. It's such an honor to have you, Mayor Landrieu. Representative Cam Buckner, thank you for being here as well.
Thank you, Cam, for coming.
Thank you.
Superstar right there, you guys. Thank you.
We hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and we'll see you back in Chicago soon. Thank you, Mayor Landrieu.
Thanks for having me.